now that you're a firm and you've set the goals, how do you keep the team and the broader firm accountable for the year to make sure that they hit those goals?
That's obviously the most important part, right? Goals are nothing if you don't perform. To me, I've always felt it comes down to like setting deadlines, right? It's funny. I remember. I'm trying to remember this study, but there's a study years ago where they talk about like what's some of the greatest value that Y Combinator has for startups, right? And like obviously you have mentorship and advice that you receive. There's a check that you get as part of being part of Y Combinator. You get to interact with other founders, all this sort of stuff. Like, what is it, right? And what they really found is it was actually the deadlines, right? It was just the fact that like you had demo day every week, and like even if it was the night before and you only made a small little update on your what you're building to show up for demo day, it was having that deadline that actually drove the most progress versus anything else, right? And so like when I think about this for managing a firm and a team around hitting our goals for capital deployment and everything else, like it's about setting those deadlines. And honestly, one of the best ways to set deadlines, I hate having meetings just to have meetings, but like some of these is you got to set the meeting. The deadline is the meeting, right? And like when the meeting happens and everybody's there and all the partners are there, and it's like you got to hit the deadline, right? Like that's when we're going to do it. And so you got to. We talked about like setting up the goal setting, having the accountability, but like the reason you're going to have these meetings is to like if you've already set the goals is to check on things, right? Like how you have the meeting for accountability, you have the meeting for course correction, you have the meeting for support, right? And like, how do we fix things? Like that's the reason you're going to have these meetings. It's not just to have them, it's to set the goals, to set a deadline for accountability, to course correct if you're off course, and to support and improve upon things with some of the best minds in the room, right? And so when you think about that, like these meetings can actually be really valuable if you actually drive them the right way. And so then it becomes, okay, well, if I'm going to set these deadlines, I'm going to set these meetings throughout the year. What's the right cadence for me to have these and for what purposes? And I think generally you've got to have some sort of like annual or biannual kind of goal setting or strategic discussion, right? Where you set like, okay, are we hitting our targets? Like, what are our targets for next year? And did we hit our targets last year? And like whatnot. And then you've got to have some ability in there. I talked about like goal setting. Okay, so we've checked the box on goal setting, some sort of annual meeting for goal setting and strategic decisions. Now you got to have some for accountability, right? And course correction, which is like, okay, let's have some checkpoints for us to say, as a team, as a firm, are we on target to get where we need to get? And we've said like, we want it, whether it's capital deployment, whether it's number of management meetings, LOIs, whatever all your targets are, have a point, maybe it's quarterly, right? Where you kind of have a big discussion. It could be biannually, and you say like, gosh, are we on target to hit our number for the end of the year? If not, how do we need to course correct? Let's make some decisions and have action items coming out of that for how we're going to course correct. And then I think the next piece of accountability to me is, so now you have this annual meeting, you got these quarterly or biannual check-ins on accountability with course correction. Now you've got to start to just make sure that's in front of you, right? Because you need that feedback loop, and you need to make sure that people are seeing their name up there and having some sort of firm-wide tracking on their progress monthly. Maybe you're not doing the full deep dive that you are quarterly or biannually, but like you've got some ability now on perhaps a monthly basis, like get time at investment committee. Maybe it's just 5 minutes. I don't care, but put the slide up there that has everybody's performance across the team. Whatever you can pull quickly. Hopefully you can pull inputs and outputs, but like whatever you can quickly pull there to show, hey, here's the goals that everybody set and here's how we're doing just to give everybody an update. And honestly, this is a good time to do two things. Some people get really scared of doing this, but naming and shaming and praising and establishing best practice sharing, right? So you've got that list up there and you say, hey, here's who's crushing it in terms of outreach. Here's who's crushing it in terms of meetings for the year and for, year to date and month by month across the year. Gosh, it looks like the team that's, focused on the Southeast or, on the hospitality vertical is just not doing well, right? So like, you guys, what the heck is going on and how are you going to get back on track, right? Call it out. It's right there. Takes 2 seconds to do it. Make sure that they know they're getting called out, because that's where accountability starts coming in. Like, you said you were going to do this. You're not doing this. What's going on, right? And how do we get you back on track? Then you got the best practice stuff too, which is like, hey, it looks like the education team is crushing it right now. Hey guys, like, what are you doing? Like, what's working so well for you, right? Like, how are you getting things to flow through the funnel so well? What should the rest of the team be doing that they're not doing? So you kind of like, again, get time at investment committee once a month, right? Like, you can carve out 15 minutes for this to just have this quick, show it up there, quick name and shame, quick appraisal and best practice sharing, and let's get back to work. So those are the first three, right? Those are kind of firm level things: annual goal setting, strategic stuff; quarterly, sort of course correction; monthly, some sort of amount of accountability and minor course correction. And then I also believe in having these two other pieces that are just focused on the sourcing team. And one of those is like, I think of it as like a monthly group coaching session. You look at like your SLAs, like so some folks might not be familiar with, like, you have these service level agreements, and the idea is that like you have an expectation of like what's going to happen for certain types of accounts with a certain standard. And so, for instance, might be, we expect that all of our top prospects are going to receive outreach at least once a month, right? Like that might be an SLA thing. And you say like, here's this, that's an SLA that we set at the BD team level. We say like, we expect that everybody on the team, if you have a top prospect, you're going to reach out to them at least once a month. Or better ones would be, you're going to have, at least a reply or a meeting with your top prospects, once a quarter or once every 6 months or whatever, right? Like those are better SLAs, again, where you're measuring the outputs instead of the inputs. But then you can have these kind of monthly coaching sessions. It gets accountability across the team, where you can start to see like, hey, how's everybody doing on those metrics that we were measuring? Like, how's everybody doing in terms of engaging their top prospects? Like, hey, Matt, it looks like you're doing a really good job at engaging your top prospects. Like, how are you doing that? Like, what's working well for you, right? And the same thing for what's not working well, right? So just a little bit of this, like, what's working, what's not stuff, and do that at a group level. And then I think the final piece as it relates to team, to me, is, you've got this weekly sort of one-on-one coaching session, right? Where you're sitting down with each team member, right? And so if I'm leading the sourcing team and Matt, you're on my team, we're sitting down and we're going like, hey man, like let's talk through your pipeline, right? What do you got coming up? What have you done the last week? Some of that sort of update stuff. But I think where people get a lot of this piece really wrong in terms of the one-on-one coaching is oftentimes they use it as a readout, right? As like, hey Matt, I want you to report to me and I want you to tell me, give me the update on your pipeline, right? And they just use it for reporting purposes, and they say, okay, cool. Yep, I see that. I see that. You did this. Tell me what you did last week. Tell me what you're going to do next week. To me, that's the wrong approach there. Think about this. You have two of the best, smartest minds in sourcing at the table together right now. What's the best and highest use of your time? To me, the best use is for that to be a problem solving session, right? Where you're figuring out, gosh, like, what are the 5 top prospects that we need to move the needle on in the next week, right? And like, what have we tried? What have we not tried? And what can we do together to get you there, right? Where you and I can sit down and we can go, gosh, all right, like this guy's going to that conference. Like you should go to travel to that conference, right? Or like, I see they're connected to this person on LinkedIn. Like, well, let's try this. Or we found this thing that they really are about these philanthropic endeavors, and they, based in Georgia, and I see they're in Atlanta, and I see that there's this philanthropic thing coming up, and like, let's, comment on that because we know that they've been involved in this and whatever, right? Like, there's just find that solution together. Like, don't use it as reporting, use it as a problem solving session. Focus on your top prospects, and then put together. People talk about this idea in sales of account planning, right? Where you go and you build like this comprehensive, detailed, line by line, everything we know about them, everything we've tried, what we're going to do next. Like like you can get really intensive when you go into account planning. But I think for starters, just do minor account planning, right? And again, like dive into 5 accounts, say weekly, here's the 5 accounts. We're going to figure out what do we know about them and what are we going to do next and what's a good angle? Lay out the angles and the things we're going to try. And then next week, let's circle back on that. Did we try all those things? What worked? What didn't work? Right? And let's create 5 more account plans and do that. And if you take that little bite-sized approach to this, you'll find shit. You've done that 5 accounts at a time, for 52 weeks in the year. Like, I'd venture to guess that, like, if if the average firm said, like, gosh, we were able to break into, gosh, what's five times 50 is a 250 prospects in a given year. Like, that's pretty needle moving.